Hello and welcome to the Curious Texan. Thank you for joining in. Today we're going to talk about capitalism versus communism. Not a theory, not a classroom debate, not something that lives in a textbook that gets dusted off every few years when somebody wants to sound smart. This is about how people actually live, because systems don't exist on paper. They exist in kitchens. They exist in paychecks. They exist in whether or not someone can build a life, or whether they spend their entire existence trying to survive inside something that never really works. So today I want to strip this down to something very simple, not soft language. It's not political spin, not pretending both sides have equal results when they clearly don't. Just one question: what works? Not what sounds fair, not what promises equality, what produces results over time with real people in the real world. Because history doesn't care what we want to be true, it records what is true. And whether we like it or not, the scoreboard is already written. So let's define the systems once so we don't keep circling back. Capitalism is built on private ownership, voluntary exchange, and incentives. You can own something. You can build something. You can risk something. And if you get it right, you benefit. If you get it wrong, you can pay for it. You can lose your ass. Trust me, I've done it. I've enjoyed both of those. That's the system. And yes, it's uneven. It produces winners and losers. But it also produces feedback. And feedback is everything. Because feedback tells you what works and what doesn't. It forces adjustment. It forces improvement. It's just better. Communism removes that. It centralizes control. It says a group, usually a very small group, can make decisions for everyone else. What gets made, how much gets made, who gets it. And the promises sound really good in theory. Equality, boy, that's something we hear a lot of. Equality, fairness, shared outcomes. But the assumption behind it is wrong, because it assumes something that has never been true in human history: that power can be centralized without being abused, that incentives can be removed without affecting behavior. This information, or that information, can be gathered at the top accurately enough to replace millions of individual decisions. That doesn't happen. It never has. And that's where the problems start. Now let's move out of theory and into reality. Let's take the United States. And forget the politics for a second. Forget the arguments. Just look at what happened. After World War II, the United States experienced something rare in human history: broad prosperity. Not just wealth at the top, movement across the middle. People didn't just survive, they advanced. And I want you to picture this clearly. A man in the 1950s, working a regular job, nothing special, no connections, no influence. That job allows him to buy a house, raise a family, own a car, save money, send his kids to school, take a vacation once in a while. That wasn't normal. That was new. For most of human history, that life was out of reach for the majority of people walking this earth. And it didn't happen because someone at the top designed it perfectly. It happened because millions of people made decisions. They worked, they built, they invested, they competed. And those decisions created momentum. That's capitalism. It doesn't look impressive when you zoom in, but when you zoom out, it changes entire societies. Now let's think about something deeper. Not money, not wealth, expectation. Capitalism creates expectation. The belief that tomorrow can be better than today. The belief that effort matters. The belief that if you push hard enough, you can move forward. That belief changes behavior. It drives energy. It drives risk-taking. It drives innovation. Now remove that belief. Take away the connection between effort and outcome. What happens? People stop pushing. They stop risking. They stop building because the system doesn't reward it. That's not theory. That's human nature. Now let's shift to the former Soviet Union. That's one of the greatest examples of all. Because if communism was ever going to work anywhere, that was the place. Massive land. Massive amounts of not human, but natural resources. Natural resources out the wazoo. A large population. Total control. No competing system internally. No alternative model. And at first glance, it looked powerful. They had rapid industrialization, military strength, global influence. But underneath that surface, the system was breaking because it wasn't built to adapt. It was built to control. Now picture daily life there. And I want you to slow down here because this is where people misunderstand everything. They think the failure was abstract. It wasn't. It was daily. You wake up, you go to work, not because you chose it, but because it was assigned. You go to the store. You don't know what's available. You don't know what's missing. You don't know when it'll be restocked. So you wait in a line. And here's the part that people who've never lived it don't fully grasp. It's hard for me to grasp. You don't even know what you're waiting for. You're just hoping something shows up you can eat. That's not inconvenience. That's instability. That changes how people think, how they plan, and obviously how they live in total. Now, why does that happen? Because this is where communism breaks down structurally. Information. In a market system, prices tell producers what people actually need. In a centralized system, that signal disappears. So decisions become guesses. And when you guess across an entire economy, you get it wrong. Constantly. Too much of what people don't need, not enough of what they do. That's where shortages come from. Now layer in incentives, because this is a fatal flaw. If working harder doesn't improve your life, why would you? If innovation isn't rewarded, why take the risk? If success doesn't belong to you, then why pursue it? Some people still will, but not enough. Not enough to sustain the system. And over time, everything slows down. Productivity drops, innovation drops, quality drops, because the system removed the reason not to. And when the system starts failing, it doesn't correct, it tightens. More control, more enforcement, because once you centralize power, you can't admit failure. Failure becomes political, and political failure becomes dangerous. So instead of fixing the system, you force compliance. And that's how you end up with things like labor camps, surveillance, punishment for stepping outside the system, because the system depends on obedience, not adaptation. Now let's move on to Cuba. Cuba strips this down even further, and it's in the news lately. And depending on what happens in the days to come, um, they'll be probably making a lot of headlines in the very near future. That'll be a whole different segment in of itself. Cuba is a smaller country than obviously than the Soviet Union. It's a simpler system. It's the same idea. The revolution came in as with the Bolsheviks and the Soviet Union came in with promises, equality, fairness, a better life for ordinary people. And in the beginning, people believe it. It sounds really good. Because that's the thing about these systems. They don't start with oppression. They start with hope. They start with the idea that something is broken and needs to be fixed. And people rally around that. But then reality shows up. Because once control replaces choice, everything narrows. Opportunity narrows, options narrow, movement narrows. And when that happens, people don't need a lecture to understand it. They feel it. Picture a young man in Cuba, smart, ambitious, wants to build something, wants to move forward. But the system doesn't reward that. The system doesn't open doors for that. So what does he do? He leaves. If he can. And that's the key phrase. If he can. Because not everyone can. But the ones who do, are able to, they leave. And they don't leave because they hate where they came from. They leave because they don't see a future inside the system they're living in. It's one of the most honest indicators you'll ever get. People don't lie with their feet. They leave systems that don't work. And Cuba has seen wave after wave of people leaving over decades, different generations, same decisions. That tells you something. People in lifeboats going from Cuba trying to make it to the Florida Keys. I've seen pictures of it, videos of it. They're risking their lives to get out of an oppressive world that they're living in. They're looking for opportunity. Now let's bring in a different system. China. Because this is where the conversation can get more complicated and muddled and actually more dangerous if you misunderstand it. China is very powerful. There's no denying that. That's fact. Economically, it's one of the more dominant forces in the world. They're number 2 behind the United States. And they've been closing the gap in the last 30 years. They manufacture at scale like none other. They have infrastructure they're building, global trade networks. So you look at it and you think, well, that's working. And that's where you get tripped up because they see the power, or you and I may see the power in their way of life, and you assume it must be working great. But China didn't rise because it stayed fully communist. It rose because it loosened its grip economically. After the Mao era, where strict central planning led to disaster and mass famine, China began allowing market activity. Not full freedom, not even close, but enough. Private businesses started to exist. Trade expanded. Foreign investment came in. That was a big one. A lot of American dollars were invested in China and from Europe. And growth followed. That's not a coincidence. That's a cause and effect. The markets were allowed to function, even partially, and the system started producing. So let's be clear. China's economic success is not proof that communism works. It's proof that markets work. Free or freer markets work, even when they're partially allowed. But here's the part that matters just as much. The Chinese never gave up control. And when I say the Chinese, I'm talking about the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. They never gave up control, not politically, not socially. The government still controls speech. They still control information. They control what can be said, what can be shared, and what can be challenged. So what you end up with is something very different, a hybrid. They have economic energy combined with political control. And that comes with a cost, because when you don't have full freedom, everything becomes conditional. You can build a business until it crosses a line. You can grow until it conflicts with the priorities of the people in power. And when that happens, the system doesn't negotiate. It adjusts you, or you may disappear. That creates a different kind of risk. It's not market risk, it's political risk. And political risk is unpredictable because it doesn't follow rules, it follows power. And when power decides to shift, everything shifts with it. So China proves two things at the same time. It proves that markets create growth, and it proves that control doesn't disappear. It just adapts. So now step back. Let's look at the pattern so far. The United States, growth with freedom. Former Soviet Union, control with collapse. Cuba, control with stagnation. China, growth with control. Different paths, different outcomes, same underlying truth. When you expand freedom, people build. When you restrict it, they adapt, but within limits. And those limits always matter. Now let's bring it forward. Because this isn't just history, this is right now. People are frustrated in the United States. And they're not wrong to feel that way. Because what they're seeing isn't clean capitalism. It's something different. It's crony capitalism. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. Crony capitalism is not necessarily a free market. It's a distorted market where success isn't just based on value. It's based on access. It's access to power, access to influence, access to rules that don't apply to the everyday working Joe out here. And if you want to see it clearly, you don't have to go back decades. You just have to look back at COVID, the whole COVID crap that happened in recent years. Same country, same communities, same virus, different rules. Large corporations allowed to stay open. When you think of Walmart, Depot, Lowe's, they were essential. The local mom and pop hardware store, they weren't. So they were made to close down. The big boys were protected. The little guys got left out in the cold. Forced to close many small businesses. Some of them never recovered. They were restricted permanently in some cases. Think about that. Two businesses. You got the big guys, you got the little guys. Same risk environment, completely different treatment. That's not competition. That's selection. And the outcome was predictable. Large companies gained ground. Many of the large corporations actually got richer during the COVID, whatever you want to call that. Local ownership shrank, small business shrank. Concentration increased. Now ask yourself, what does it look like to someone watching it? Especially someone young, especially someone trying to get started in life. They don't see capitalism. They see a system that looks rigged. They see a system where the rules aren't the same. They see a system where the people at the top are protected and everyone else is exposed. And here's where the shift happens. They reject it. But they don't reject it accurately. They reject what they think it is in total. And in places like New York City, you're seeing this play out in real time. New York City just recently, they elected an avowed communist as the mayor of the crown jewel of the United States, New York City. World renowned. on the greatest cities on the earth. Growing support for socialist ideas rather. Not because these people studied the Soviet Union and decided it was the answer, because they feel locked out of the system that they're in. Extreme high housing costs, barriers to entry, debt, limited mobility. So they look for something else, something that sounds fair, something that promises balance, something that feels like it corrects what they're experiencing. And communism, or some version of it, gets repackaged as that solution. And here's the problem. They're diagnosing the wrong disease. Because what they're reacting to isn't capitalism working correctly, it's capitalism being distorted. True capitalism opens markets. Crony capitalism closes them or restricts them. True capitalism rewards value. Crony capitalism rewards access. True capitalism allows failure. Crony capitalism protects the well-connected. And if you replace a distorted system with one that centralizes power, you don't fix the problem. You lock that problem in, and it is very hard to get out. Because centralized power doesn't eliminate unfairness. It concentrates it. And once it's concentrated, it's really hard to escape. And I don't even have time to mention North Korea, probably the worst example of all, but we'll just lightly touch on it because it's what happens when you take this idea all the way to its extreme, the idea of communism. Total control, total isolation, total collapse of opportunity, despair, and the only way that system survives is through brutal force. Now step back again, and let's look at the full picture. Across time, across countries, across systems. What actually works? It's not what sounds good, not what promises equality, not what looks clean on paper, what produces real results over time with real people. That's the question. So now we come back to the question, not the political version of it, not the emotional version, the real one. Again, what actually works. Not in theory, not in reality, but over time. And this is where everything becomes clear. Capitalism does not require people to be perfect. It works with who they already are. It channels self-interest into production. It channels competition into improvement. It channels risk into innovation. It's not clean. It's not always fair, but it moves. It adjusts. It corrects. Because everything is fair, then you don't have freedom. And if everything's free, then it's not fair. I mean, that's just the way it is. We can't all be equal because we're not. I mean, I don't want someone with a 75 IQ operating on my shoulder. I just don't. I'm sorry. It just doesn't work that way. Not everyone is 100% equal. But capitalism takes the chains off and it gives people a chance. We have the right to pursue happiness in this land, in our version of capitalism. It doesn't guarantee you're going to find it. It doesn't guarantee you're going to be a success. It guarantees you the right to try. And that means a lot. That's everything. Communism asks something very different. It asks people to behave differently than they naturally do. It asks them to ignore incentives. It asks them to trust centralized power. It asks them to believe that control will stay fair, even when history shows that it doesn't. And that's the break point. Because systems don't succeed based on how good they sound. They succeed on how well they align with reality. Now, think about it in practical terms. If you give someone the ability to build something and keep the result, they're more likely to try. If you give someone the ability to improve their situation, they're more likely to push. If you give someone ownership, they care way more about the outcome. Now reverse it. The effort doesn't lead to improvement. Effort fades. If ownership doesn't exist, responsibility fades. If success is detached from reward, motivation fades. That's not political, that's behavioral. And systems that ignore behavior fail. Now let's bring it down to something even more basic. Freedom. Because underneath all of this, that's what we're really talking about. Not just economic systems, not just production. Freedom. The ability to make choices about your own life. The ability to take a risk. The ability to fail without being destroyed. The ability to recover. And the ability to try again. Capitalism at its core leaves room. Room to build, room to move, room to adapt, room to change direction. Communism narrows that room. It doesn't always happen all at once. Sometimes it's gradual. Sometimes it starts with good intentions, but it moves in one direction, toward total control. And once that control is in place, it doesn't give itself up easily because power rarely does. So now look back at everything we've walked through. United States, a system where freedom and economic activity expand together. The Soviet Union, a system where control replaced feedback and eventually collapsed under its own weight. Cuba, a system where control limited opportunity and people left when they could. China, a system that allowed economic growth but never released social control. Different paths, different countries, the same pattern. When people are given room, they build. When they're restricted, they adjust within the limits they're given as best they can. And those limits always show up. Now I'll deal with something directly. As people hear this argument and say, okay, but capitalism has problems. Of course it does. No serious person denies that. This doesn't work. Whether capitalism has flaws, it's whether the alternative is better. And that's where the conversation usually falls apart. Because instead of comparing real systems, people compare reality to theory. They compare imperfect capitalism to perfect communism, which has never existed. And if you want to be honest, you compare real to real. Imperfect capitalism to actual communism. As it has existed, as it has been tried, as it has played out. And when you do that, the gap is obvious. So bring it back to today. Again, people are frustrated, feel like the system isn't working for them, and in some ways they're right because what they're experiencing in many cases, as I stated before, isn't true capitalism. It's been that crony capitalism crap. And we don't want that, and I believe that needs to change. But you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The pure function of capitalism is where opportunity is born. Strip it all away, what actually works, not in theory, but in reality. Capitalism versus communism, it's not even close. I want to thank you guys again for joining me in this wonderful country we live in, the United States of America, and I'm proud to be from the great state of Texas, obviously, the name of this podcast. I hope you got something out of this. Please like, share, subscribe on this channel, whatever platform you're viewing this on or listening to it. And please comment. Give me your best. Keep it classy, but please comment within the platform